Rain had been falling for hours, thick, merciless, and endless. By midnight, the small Indiana town felt like a ghost of itself. Empty streets shimmered under flickering yellow lights. Wind howled past shuttered windows, rattling old fences and bending leafless trees as if trying to shake the town awake. There were no footsteps, no cars, no voices, only the storm, and something moving within it. Through a flooded alley behind a forgotten warehouse, a shadow limped forward. Mud clung to every step like a chain. It was a dog, barely recognizable beneath the filth, soaked to the bone. A German shepherd, skeletal and trembling, his golden black fur plastered in clumps against sunken ribs. One ear drooped, the other flicked, as if it still hoped to hear a familiar voice. His name had once been Max. He didn't remember when he last heard it. Not truly. Only fragments remained, distant echoes of someone throwing a ball, calling out in joy. He had chased it through grass once, tail wagging, heart light. That life had faded like breath on glass. Now, there were only nights like this. Cold, wet, endless. Max stumbled past a shattered trash bin, nosing at empty wrappers and moldy paper. Nothing. His belly cramped with hunger. He paused, shivering beneath the weight of the storm. Then, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the rain. Faint, fragile, almost drowned by the storm. A cry, not a dog's, not a cat's, a human cry, high, broken, and desperately alone. Max froze. His ears twitched, lifting slightly. Every instinct flared. Pain and exhaustion vanished for a breath. Something in that sound pierced him deeper than hunger ever could. He turned toward the forest's edge, toward that voice, and he ran. Branches whipped his sides. Thorns tore his legs. The mud sucked at his paws. But he didn't stop. That cry was calling him, pulling him. Past broken logs, over slick roots, under jagged brambles, until he found it. A styrofoam box, half buried under soggy leaves and twigs. It shook, not from the wind, but from something alive within it. Max sniffed. Sour milk, damp cloth, blood. He nudged the lid open with his nose. Inside, wrapped in a drenched towel, lay a newborn. A girl, no more than a few days old. Her skin pale blue, lips cracked, eyes barely open. She didn't cry anymore, just whimpered, too weak to wail. Max stood still, rain streaming down his face. He didn't understand why, only that she was like him, abandoned, left in the dark, and she needed someone. Slowly, he lowered his head and gripped the edge of the box with his teeth. Then, he pulled. The box was heavier than it looked, waterlogged and swollen with mud. Each tug sent it scraping against roots, bumping into stones. Max's legs shook beneath him. His jaw ached. But he didn't let go. He had no plan, no direction, only instinct. The forest around him groaned with wind and rain. Every shadow whispered danger. But Max's focus narrowed to one purpose: get the child out. He dragged the box inch by inch through the thorns. When it jammed against a thick root, he pressed his shoulder into it, using the last of his strength to shove it free. His sides scraped raw. Blood trickled down one leg. The storm stole his warmth, but not his will. And inside the box, the baby stirred. A tiny gasp escaped her lips. It was enough. Max kept going. His body, broken and starving, moved like a soldier on the final march. Nothing else mattered. Not the pain, not the cold, not the fear that the world would never notice them. Eventually, after what felt like miles, but was barely a few hundred yards, Max emerged from the trees. Ahead, a highway, quiet, dark, slick with rain. No lights, no people, only the distant hum of engines, rushing by too fast to see. He stepped onto the shoulder and placed the box beside him. Then he barked, once, twice, louder. Every bark came from somewhere deep inside. Not a warning, not a growl, a plea. Cars passed. Tires hissed against the wet asphalt. No one slowed. No one stopped. To them, he was just a mangy stray barking in the rain. But he didn't give up. Max stood guard over the box, barking at every passing light. When his voice failed, he whimpered. When even that faded, he curled his body around the foam walls, sheltering the child with the last warmth he had. His breath was shallow now. His muscles quivered uncontrollably. The storm poured on. But still, he did not move, because she was still breathing, and he would not let her be alone. Not again. Dawn arrived quietly, wrapped in silver mist. The storm had broken, leaving behind puddles like glass and roads that shimmered with soft, cold light. Everything was still, washed, quiet, reborn. At the edge of the road, a woman walked. Margaret Lewis, 52, moved slowly under a faded umbrella. Her routine never changed. Same path, same diner shift. She liked the silence before the world woke. But today, something tugged at her steps. A dark shape, lying at the roadside. She squinted through the fog, her hand tightening on the umbrella's handle. As she neared, her breath caught. A dog, large, soaking, curled tightly around something. A white box. Margaret froze. Her heart pounded. The dog looked like death itself. Skin and bones, patches of fur missing, blood streaked down one leg. But he didn't move. Just lay there, guarding whatever was in the box like it was the most important thing in the world. She stepped closer, slowly, whispering, "Hey, sweetheart." The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. His ears flicked weakly. He lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes. And in that moment, Margaret saw it. Not fear, not pain, but a question. Did I do enough? She knelt beside him and brushed away the wet leaves. The box trembled. A soft, impossible sound came from within. A cry. Margaret's breath hitched. She tore back the cloth lining the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a newborn, blue-lipped, shaking, barely breathing. Margaret's knees gave out. Her umbrella fell to the ground. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice cracking. The dog let out a faint, rasping sound, too weak to bark. His nose twitched toward the baby, then toward her. "Help her, please." Margaret scooped the box into her arms, clutching the child to her chest. "I've got you," she murmured. "You're safe now." She turned to the dog. He didn't move, just watched her with dim, loyal eyes. Eyes that had stayed open all night, not for his sake, but for hers. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. And as the sirens echoed faintly through the morning fog, Margaret whispered again, "You stayed with her. All night. You kept her warm." The dog blinked slowly, and then finally, he closed his eyes. The ambulance arrived within minutes, tires hissing against the wet pavement. Paramedics spilled out with practiced urgency, their breath fogging in the chilled morning air. Lights flashed silently across the mist, painting the road in fleeting reds and blues. Margaret stood at the shoulder, cradling the foam box in both arms like it was made of glass. "There's a baby," she called out. "She's still breathing, and the dog, he saved her." Clarissa, the lead EMT, met her halfway, eyes sharp but gentle. When she opened the box and saw the tiny girl inside, her breath caught. "Get the incubator," she snapped to her team. "Thermal blankets now." Another paramedic turned toward the dog, still lying curled in the mud, barely conscious. "We've got a dog down too. Looks bad." They moved quickly. The baby was wrapped in warm fabric and fitted with a tiny oxygen mask. Her heartbeat fluttered like a bird's wing against Clarissa's gloved hand. But it was there. The dog, Max, was gently lifted onto a stretcher. He didn't resist, didn't whine, but his eyes, clouded and tired, scanned the area until they landed on the foam box. Even now, he was watching her. His vitals are weak, one EMT said. Lacerations, exposure. Looks like he's been out here for days. Not alone, Margaret murmured. He's been here, with her, all night. Officer Neil Grant arrived just as they loaded the baby into the back of the ambulance. He was silent at first, just taking in the scene. The dented box, the deep paw prints in the mud, the blood-streaked dog, the stunned woman trembling in the rain. "A baby?" he finally asked. "Abandoned." Margaret nodded. Her voice was thin. "He kept her alive. This dog, he didn't leave her." Neil's eyes flicked toward the stretcher. He took a long, steadying breath. Clarissa climbed into the ambulance, securing the baby's blanket with practiced care. "She's going to make it," she said, though her voice was softer than usual. "But just barely." Max, lying on his own stretcher beside the EMT van, cracked one eye open. He couldn't bark, couldn't lift his head. But when he saw the baby one last time, a faint tremor ran through his paw. Margaret knelt beside him. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his head. "You did good, boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You did more than anyone." The engines roared back to life. The road was empty again, but something had changed. In the span of a single morning, a broken dog and a forgotten baby had become something else, something no one could yet name. But Margaret knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 ambulances pulled away from the roadside, one carrying a newborn wrapped in wires and warmth, the other carrying a dog wrapped in silence and blood. At Indiana State Children's Hospital, doctors hovered over the tiny girl with the urgency reserved for miracles. Her vitals were faint but present. Every breath she took inside the neonatal unit felt like defiance, a whisper of life pushing back against the void she had been left in. A nurse gently unwrapped her soaked towel. The umbilical cord was still attached. Her lips were cracked, her skin bruised and cold to the touch. A senior pediatrician noticed faint marks across her wrists, scratches, some shallow, some older. A pause followed. No one spoke, but the room tensed as if holding breath. This baby hadn't simply been abandoned. Someone had hurt her first. 2 miles away, at a quiet veterinary clinic tucked between a grocery store and an old church, Max was laid on a steel table. The warmth of a blanket beneath him was foreign. The smell of antiseptic stung his nose. Dr. Raymond Harris, a weathered man in his 50s with eyes that softened for creatures others ignored, examined him carefully. "Exhaustion, exposure, blood loss," he murmured. "And this?" He gently lifted Max's front leg and winced. A dislocated paw, swollen and raw, but it was the scars that gave him pause. A long, ragged stitch across the shoulder. Healed poorly. Another mark around the neck, where a collar must have once dug deep. Abuse, neglect, maybe worse. Raymond exhaled slowly, brushing the dog's fur with the back of his hand. Max didn't flinch. Instead, he looked up with hollow eyes that seemed to ask a question no vet could answer. "Is it safe to rest now?" Raymond didn't respond with words. He just stroked the matted fur once more and nodded, almost to himself. "Not yet, boy. But we're trying." Back at the hospital, Margaret sat outside the NICU, eyes red, hands trembling around a cup of untouched coffee. The image of the dog curled around that box kept flashing in her mind. How he hadn't moved, hadn't left. How even now, he lay somewhere alone and healing. She had never intended to care for anyone again. She lived alone, worked quiet mornings, kept to herself. But when the nurse came out to give her an update, Margaret surprised even herself by asking, "Can I stay? Tonight, I mean. Just close." The nurse smiled softly. "We'll bring you a chair." Margaret didn't go home. She sat in the hallway, close to the infant she hadn't named, near the memory of a dog she hadn't expected. Because something inside her, quietly and without permission, had already begun to change. The next day, the social worker arrived. Linda Carter had seen it all. Cases that broke headlines, babies left in alleyways, teens found in shelters, dogs tied to trees behind gas stations. She didn't cry over files anymore. She didn't flinch when hearing the worst. But she paused when she opened this one. Newborn found in foam box. German Shepherd kept child alive overnight in storm. Her pen hovered above the page. A miracle, they were calling it. But Linda didn't believe in miracles. Not until the paperwork was filed, and the child had a safe bed to sleep in. When she entered the hospital's small consultation room, Margaret was already waiting. Her silver hair was tied back. Her eyes looked older than her years, but she sat upright, steady, even as her hands fidgeted in her lap. Linda began with protocol, living conditions, income, health. Are you aware of the medical fragility of the child? Do you understand what fostering entails? Margaret didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just answered plainly. Number, I don't know everything, but I was there, and I couldn't walk away. Linda raised an eyebrow. You've never fostered before. You're single. You work full-time, and now you want to take in a newborn. And the dog? Margaret nodded. They're not separate. They've been through this together. Linda made notes. Her face gave nothing away. Later that evening, she visited the vet clinic. Raymond met her at the door. He didn't explain much, just led her into the recovery room where Max lay wrapped in fresh blankets. He was awake. He didn't lift his head when she entered, but his eyes followed her every move, wary but calm, as if he knew this woman was different. Linda knelt by his side. She didn't touch him, didn't speak at first. Then quietly she asked, "Why didn't you run?" The dog didn't answer. Of course not. But his eyes lingered on the empty space at the doorway, where Mira had once been, in that box, crying in the rain. And something in Linda shifted, just slightly, like the softest crack in armor. But cracks, she knew, could let in light. She stood and turned to Raymond. "What's his name?" "He doesn't have one." Linda paused, then wrote on the intake chart, "Name, Guardian." The house was small. The furniture was old, but everything was clean, quiet, and warm. Margaret had done all she could. A donated crib stood beside the living room window, its bars polished by hand. Beside it, a folded blanket on the floor. Guardian's place. She had cleaned the carpets, sterilized bottles, bought a second-hand rocker from the thrift store. No one had asked her to. But love doesn't wait for permission. Mira had come home, and so had Guardian. He was slower now, walking gingerly on stiff legs. But every time Mira stirred, he moved. A twitch in her sleep, a hiccup, a whimper. He would rise, pad to her crib, and rest his nose against the rail until her breath returned to calm. They had been strangers once. Now they were rhythm. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the walls in gold. Mira blinked awake, and before she could cry, Guardian was already there, watching, waiting. She reached for him, fists waving blindly, and calmed the moment her hand brushed his fur. Margaret didn't understand it, but she wrote it all down, in a little blue notebook, just in case someone ever needed proof that something beautiful had happened here. Then came the day everything broke. It started quietly. A new formula, a doctor's recommendation. Mira had shown signs of allergies, and Margaret followed instructions carefully. Mix, test, feed, slowly. At first, everything seemed fine, until Mira's skin flushed red, until her breathing hitched, until she stopped making sound. It happened so fast. Guardian was the first to sense it. He jolted from his sleep, ran to the crib, and barked, a sharp, panicked sound that Margaret had never heard from him before. He barked again, high and desperate, then bolted to her bedroom, teeth tugging at the blanket. Margaret sat up in a daze. Then she saw his eyes, and she ran. Margaret burst into the nursery. The world froze. Mira lay still in the crib, face flushed purple, tiny lips blue, chest unmoving. Time fractured around her. Margaret screamed. She scooped the baby into her arms, trembling as she fumbled for her phone. Her voice cracked as she shouted into the receiver, "She's not breathing. Please, it's Mira. She's not. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm but urgent, walking her through CPR. Margaret obeyed with shaking hands, puffing short breaths into Mira's mouth, whispering over and over, come back, please." Beside her, Guardian stood completely still, eyes locked on Mira, every muscle tense, tail low, breath shallow. He didn't blink. He just watched. 8 minutes later, the ambulance screamed down the street. The EMTs rushed in, carried Mira out with swift, careful hands, oxygen tubes already being connected. One nurse looked down at Guardian, crouched by the doorway, and murmured under her breath, "If he hadn't barked." The words didn't finish. Margaret followed the stretcher, eyes swollen, heart numb. Guardian remained behind. He didn't move until the flashing lights disappeared. That night at the hospital, Mira's life hung by a thread. The doctors called it an anaphylactic reaction, severe, rare, nearly fatal. Had detection been delayed by even 3 minutes, a physician said softly, we would have lost her. Margaret didn't leave the hospital room. She sat at Mira's side, one hand wrapped around the baby's fingers, the other resting gently on Guardian's head. He lay curled at the foot of the crib, unmoving, eyes half closed. "You saved her again," she whispered. "You never stop watching." No reply, just the rise and fall of his breath, calm and low, like a steady drum in the silence. And somewhere inside that silence, Margaret realized, Guardian didn't just protect Mira. He knew her, and that knowing had saved her life. The story should have ended there, with rescue, survival, and a home. But fate had more to uncover. 3 days after Mira's emergency, Dr. Raymond Harris sat in his office at the veterinary clinic, flipping through old files. Guardian had been healing slowly, his limp improving, his wounds closing. But something gnawed at Raymond's instincts. This dog wasn't just brave, he was trained. The way he responded to sound, the way he placed himself between danger and Mira. His discipline, even in pain, it wasn't random. It was purposeful, precise. And then Raymond saw it. A small patch of fur just above Guardian's shoulder was thinner than the rest. Beneath it, faint black ink, numbers tattooed, military. Raymond froze. His hands moved carefully as he snapped a photo and sent it to an old friend, retired K9 handler, still connected to the archives. The reply came 2 days later. K9 Maverick, male, purebred German Shepherd, Special Ops Unit, presumed KIA 4 years ago after a failed mission in the Middle East. Handler, Sergeant Caleb Brower. Raymond stared at the screen. Guardian was Maverick, a war dog, declared dead, but he had survived, and somehow, after all the chaos and loss, he had ended up in a rainy forest, dragging a newborn to safety. Later that week, Officer Neil Grant received another file. It connected Caleb's brother, Ethan Brower, to a location near where Mira was found. Ethan was under quiet investigation for suspected involvement in human trafficking. The baby in the box. The military dog declared dead. The footprints in the mud. This wasn't just a miracle anymore. It was a mystery. Linda Carter sat in her office late into the night, the photo of Guardian and Mira resting on her desk. The image wasn't sharp, just a grainy snapshot from the hospital. But it said everything no report could. Mira's tiny hand rested on Guardian's neck. The dog lay curled around her crib, eyes half closed, breath calm. A stillness so complete, it felt sacred. Linda had never believed in fairy tales, but she knew what devotion looked like. Earlier that day, she had returned to the hospital, not as a caseworker, but as a witness. No clipboard, no legal form, just herself. Margaret had been sitting in the chair beside Mira's crib, one hand around the child's bandaged arm, the other resting on Guardian's head. They didn't speak. They didn't see her at first. It was a moment suspended in its own quiet orbit. And Guardian was watching Mira breathe, as if her heartbeat set the rhythm for his own. Linda knelt beside him. He opened his eyes. Didn't move, didn't bark. Just watched her with the same resolve she'd seen in the eyes of night shift nurses and exhausted parents. The quiet vow. I won't leave. She didn't touch him, but her voice softened to something unfamiliar, something almost human. You've proven what none of us dared believe, she whispered. That love doesn't need rules, just the choice to stay. Back in her office, she picked up the case file. She didn't open it. She simply slid a pen across the last page and wrote, "This is no longer temporary. This is a family." The sun rose softly over Evansdale, Indiana, casting long golden streaks through kitchen windows and quiet streets. It was a day like any other, except it wasn't. Word had spread, not just in hushed hospital hallways or behind diner counters, but across the town, then the county, and eventually the state. A story had taken root, of a starving dog, a discarded baby, and the night everything could have ended, but didn't. People whispered about it in grocery aisles, news vans parked discreetly outside the clinic. Someone had printed the photo of Guardian, curled beside Mira, and pinned it to the community board at the post office. Above it, in handwritten ink, "Real heroes don't wear capes. They stay." At Margaret's house, nothing was flashy, but everything was full. A soft pink blanket now covered Mira's crib. Guardian's water bowl sat beneath the window, where sunlight warmed the tiles. Margaret had even painted the front steps. Just a fresh coat of blue. Small things, quiet things. But it all mattered. Mira had begun to smile. Not often, not for long. But when she did, it was usually when Guardian was near. His tail, still slow from recovery, wagged once, maybe twice. He didn't need to be close, just in view. That was enough. Margaret kept writing in her notebook. Dates, details, little miracles. Guardian moving without command when Mira cried. Mira falling asleep when his nose touched the rail of the crib. One afternoon, she sent a copy of the pages to Linda. Attached was a photo. Mira asleep, her hand curled in Guardian's fur. Guardian, awake, lying protectively around the crib like a silent circle of trust. Linda didn't write back, but that night, in her office, she closed the door and cried. The letter arrived on a Thursday, typed, stamped, and official, but with a single handwritten line at the bottom. "This is justice." Margaret opened it with trembling hands. Inside, full guardianship approval. Mira was hers, by law, by heart, by name. And Guardian was now a registered therapy dog, official, protected, a title he never needed, but had always earned. The town responded with quiet celebration. Neighbors dropped off diapers and canned dog food. A retired carpenter offered to build a new crib. Someone left a bouquet on the porch with a note that simply read, "Thank you for staying." Mira grew stronger. Guardian walked without limping now, though he never strayed far from her side. At night, when Margaret turned off the lights, he would curl at the base of the crib, one ear always tilted toward the soft rhythm of her breath. Weeks passed, then months. A local journalist published the story. The headline read, "No cape needed, just a loyal heart." The article reached tens of thousands. Comments poured in. Tears, prayers, people who believed again because of a dog who didn't give up. A man from another state wrote, "My daughter is scared of dogs." After reading about Guardian, she asked if he could protect her too. "Thank you for showing us that love speaks in silence." Back at the clinic, Dr. Raymond often stood by the window at sunset, watching Guardian sit in the yard, eyes calm, gaze distant. One evening, as he cleaned the last of the mud from an old scar on Guardian's shoulder, Raymond paused. The tattooed numbers, the missing handler, the broken chain of command that led Maverick to become Guardian. It wasn't just a story of survival. It was redemption. Not just for Guardian, but for every soul who had ever been forgotten and chose, against all odds, to love anyway. And late one night, as Mira stirred softly in her crib, Margaret rose to check on her. Guardian was already there, standing like a quiet sentinel. She knelt beside him, kissed the top of his head, and whispered through tears, "You brought her home, and you brought me back to life too." Guardian didn't move. He didn't need to. He was home, and this time no one was leaving.